I wanted to start the week off with a bang, so let's talk about Bretonnia, which are a faction that previously were one of the best armies in the game, and I think have gotten even better comparative to the rest of the field. Just to quickly look at the specific changes in the FAQ for Bretonians, there's not really that many, and they're not really that impactful, with one exception. So, first of all, Royal Pegasus. Royal Pegasus has changed to 70 points instead of 60, so theoretically, that's a 10-point nerf, or, well, it is a 10-point nerf. That's not really impactful. It does make it slightly tighter in terms of fitting your characters in, but I have not had issues fitting as many characters in as I want to. I would say, what is effectively a 20-point nerf on the 2 Royal Pegasus you're probably going to bring doesn't move the needle. It's, very small change there. Pegasus Knights change the points to 59 and delete Lance Formation from the list of special rules. So, there used to be 55 points, it's a 4-point nerf, this is not a big deal, this is a very small change overall. Again, between this change here and this change, you're probably looking at needing to find 40 points in your list, which, yes, especially if you're playing something like Exiles, it can be quite tight to fit all of the stuff in that you want, but I don't think it doesn't feel like a meaningful nerf to me when I've been writing lists. Deleting Lance Formation. This is a little bit more of an actual nerf, and that's weird to say because previously you wouldn't see a lot of situations where you'd want to put Pegasus Knights into Lance Formation. However, we do now have lots of Death Stars. This is something that would have been good at charging Death Stars, because if you're in Lance Formation, all of the models on the outside of the Lance get to attack, so it's much easier for you to actually get the attacks in, instead of just going, oh, I can only go 4 wide or 5 wide, whatever it ends up being. If you're charging a Death Star, it's not too bad, but, potentially you hit at a weird angle, or it's a little bit thinner that you want. There are situations where being in Lance Formation would have actually been quite nice. So, 2 changes here, not particularly bothered about them. Then there is a big nerf, Falcon Horn of Freedom. This has now become a single use. So instead of just being every turn you blow the horn, you re-roll the leadership test with your veteran, and then you turn off fly for pretty much the entirety of the game. Now it is single use, and you still have to take the leadership test, and you still cannot be engaged in combat when you use it. So it's gone from being an auto-take even in Grand Army, where you didn't have the reliability of the re-roll from veteran, to now just being probably not. 40 points for a once per game on a leadership 8 or 9 test, whether or not you've got veteran, I don't like it. Falcon Horn has just dropped out of all of my lists, which, for the health of the game, I think is very good. Burning Gaze has gone down from a 10 to a 9, obviously paired with the casting changes for how magic has worked. This is fine, but I don't think it's particularly meaningful. I'm not necessarily looking for a caster to use Burning Gaze in the new changes. We'll talk about that more when we get to the spell laws. And that's it in terms of the actual errata changes. Then if we go down to, sorry, the FAQ changes, if we go down here to the rest, we've got a couple of clarifications. Can a unit with defensive stakes be hit by impact hits or stomp attacks by a charging enemy? Yes, so basically they're there to deter cavalry and chariots. However, they do still, once they've hit and taken the damage, they do still get to make the impact hits and stomp attacks. So, I wasn't buying these beforehand. I really like my archers to have skirmish, so not a big difference here, but nice to have that clarified. And then we've also got what happens to a unit in Lance Formation that declares a charge that finds its movement blocked by the presence of an enemy unit to the flank, where the unit gets wider, and it just clarifies this is accidental contact. Yes, and then you make contact, but in a weird way. So fine, just good to have that clarified. Not too much to go into in the FAQs. I've got a little bit of a different format here. So instead of just doing changes and listing through all of the changes for Bretonnia, I feel like there's a lot that has affected them or has dodged them. And I wanted to talk about them in terms of here's changes that are sort of a net neutral. They kind of come out in the wash. Then I've got some nerfs and buffs as well that I want to talk about specifically. So whether I do that for the rest of the armies, some armies are less affected by the changes. We'll see. So starting off with changes to Bretonnia that aren't necessarily buffs or nerfs. Pegasus Knights, Lance and Skirmish. These are really kind of nerfs, and we've just talked about the Lance changes, but they're not massively impactful. So I've put it in this section. I don't think it's worth calling it a nerf. Lance Formation you weren't using previously, so it's not too big of a deal, or you weren't using it often anyway. It would be nice to have here, but it's not the end of the world. And then Skirmish changes. The way that this has changed is half of the unit has to be able to see the unit that you're declaring a charge at. This sounds punishing until you remember that you've got 360 line of sight on your models. So it's very easy to set up your unit so that it should be able to see anything anyway. It's very hard to avoid. There's maybe going to be some skirmish versus skirmish dancing around where your opponent puts a unit of Pegasus Knights in your flank in some sort of like weird pseudo marching column so that only 3 of your 7 models can see them or something like that. But I think that's going to be very hard to set up, and it's not really going to be a big issue. The one time that it might be an issue, which has been brought up to me, is that if you charge a unit, after the charge is done, you are then more close together, and something could theoretically be in your flank, where maybe two models in the unit can see instead of 3 or 4 that need to be able to see to charge. I think in practice this is not going to be much of an issue, but you do have to be sort of cognizant of where you're going to overrun to. You don't want to end up wanting to charge sideways, but you've blocked yourself in because you're too closely arrayed, something like that. Fly move. Again, this is technically a nerf, but it's not a big deal. You can't use the fly move on the pursuit roll or the flee, so you just have to move along the floor. I'll be honest, this is mostly how I was playing it anyway. It was one that I was super not clear on, and I'm glad to see it clarified. So that's just standardized there, and it won't come up very often, but sort of, I don't know, 1 in 20 games you'll be like, oh, actually, it would have been really nice to be able to fly over whatever, the edge of that building or something like that. Regeneration. Again, this is a slight buff, I would say, instead of a slight nerf. So regeneration has changed. Instead of, it was previously you got to take a regen save, and then it blocked all the damage. Now you do that. You take the damage and you roll all your regen saves. I quite like this on the lower wound models that might have it. So whether you've gone for a character that has got the regen armor, or if you've cast the Lady's Grace on the unit to give them a regen save as well. It just means that you get hit by the multi-wound, and then you roll your regens. If you're being hit by D3 wounds, which is an average of 2, on a 2-wound model, you're more likely to survive if you can roll... You only need to roll 1 of the 2 to pass, right? So you've got a 55% chance to pass instead of a 33% chance to pass. So on low wound models, the regen save is a bigger buff against D3 damage weapons. It kind of comes out on the wash a little bit on the D3 plus 1 because you have to pass 2 of them. But this is, I think, a nice change for Bretts, but not a huge nerf or buff. Finally, we've got Vanguard. There is the Exiles Vanguard banner, which lets you move before the game. It gave you a massive threat range. This is technically a nerf, but I think when I was writing Exiles list, I was struggling to put it in anyway, and I often didn't charge turn 1 anyway. I just used it to reposition. Now I'm probably just not going to take it, but the change so that you can't charge after you make a Vanguard move does that mean that people have to, don't have to give you quite as much respect on that big bus of, 2 characters, 5 Pegasus Knights, whatever you had running around in Exiles, trying to get that very early charge off. Yeah, again, realistically, I don't think this is much of a change in terms of how you play, because people just wouldn't let you get that turn 1 charge. But it does make it more difficult for you to play aggressive early on. Yes. Now, onto the things that I think are worth mentioning as nerfs to Bretonnia. We're going to start off with the Falcon Horn. We've talked about this already. Previously, you were able to turn off fly for your opponent for basically all of the game, especially if you had Veteran, if you were in one of the Arcane Journal Armies of Infamy. So you were very consistently stopping the dragon from moving 10 inches, make it only move 6, make it much harder. You could win, even, you outposition them very easily, but you could also just be so you were, out of range of their declarable charge, but in range of your declarable charge. Make it very difficult for them to play the game. That's gone away. I think we just dropped Falcon Horn from the list, and that is the sort of biggest nerf I see to Bretonnia, because you lose some of that counterplay that was just inherent in every list that you saw. Minor points changes. Technically a nerf, not a major nerf. If my list only has to find 40 points, I can probably do that, And I'm not saying that as theoretically I can do that. This is the army I've been writing the most lists for. The changes to Bretonnia have me really jazzed to put them on the table. I'm not much of a fan of knights. I quite like ranked up infantry, which is weird to say when I'm talking about the faction that is mostly horses, but I think Bretonnia have really good infantry, which we'll get to later on down the line. And I'm more interested in putting a sturdy core on the table with some supportive pieces. So, minor points changes, I'm not too bothered about. Earthen Ramparts, this is worth mentioning because it, you don't do any impact hits. You have very limited stomp attacks in this faction, and obviously Earthen Ramparts does turn off both of those, but it limits the amount of attacks you can make into a unit. Is Earthen Ramparts a nerf to Bretonnian aggressive playstyles? Yes, but less so than some other armies. Why? If you wanted to put a dragon, a dragon lord into a unit with earthen ramparts, well, you're only getting 2 attacks. One from the dragon, one from the rider. If you put a duke or, let's say, a baron on Pegasus into the unit, yes, I also only get 2 attacks, so I'm doing a very similar sort of output, although my attacks are a little bit worse. But I've probably also got a unit of Pegasus Knights with me. Or I've charged you with a unit of Knights of the Realm. I still get to make 1 attack with a knight, 1 attack with the horse. So it doesn't end up being as much of a disruption for this faction as some other factions, but it is something that you do have to keep in mind, and it is one of the counters you can use to play against Bretonnia. If you're worried about getting charged in the flank or the rear and you can't position because, Bretonians bring so much mobility, it's really hard to outposition them, Earthen Ramparts is a nice tool to keep a unit relatively safe, but Bretonnia are less vulnerable to that than something like a dragon, as mentioned. Minor skirmish nerfs, again, it's worth mentioning. There are going to be moments where this catches you out if you're not aware of it, but I think in sort of real table play, it's not really going to come up very often, especially given the note in the FAQ that you have to move after you've finished combat, because you go into this sort of weird, not close order, but close fighting formation, and then it says move back out until you're in skirmish. It doesn't really clarify what skirmish formation is, but it does say that you do need to move out of base to base or move separate a little bit, so I don't think the actual vision changes are going to be too big of a deal. Challenges. This is something we have to be aware of. Again, we have to be aware of it less than Dragon Lords, because if you've got a character that is stuck in a challenge, you probably have them backed up by a unit of 3 to 5 Pegasus Knights, or 6 to 10 Knights of the Realm, or maybe some Grail Knights. You're bringing some friends for your unit, and that's because you're not riding around on something that's going to be just sort of solo stomping. You can take the Hippogriff, and I think the Hippogriff is pretty decent. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But it is, it is definitely a nerf. Something to, an upside, I would say, is that the Royal Pegasus and the Hippogriff both have the same initiative as the Duke and the Baron. Everything strike at initiative 5, which means, yes, theoretically you're going to lose the stomp attacks in a challenge, but you're going to lose less than most other armies. So I could go in with my Virtue of Knightly Temper character, get all my attacks, re-rolling my hits, do my wounds, great AP, multiple wounds if it's not a unit champion, maybe if I'm going into a cheap character, something like that. Even if I kill it, I still get to make the Royal Pegasus attacks, and then I just lose the stomp attacks. So I'm less worried about that than I would be, again, for a Lord on a Dragon, where potentially the elf on top kills the character with its 4 attacks, and then I get to lose the real value attacks that you have in terms of the dragon's attacks. Because in a challenge, I don't know if I mentioned it, the way that it works now is if you kill your opponent in a challenge, you make all of the attacks at the initiative step where the opponent died, but then you stop making extra attacks. So less of a nerf here for Bretonnian, but still worth considering. Weapons and charging. This is a nerf and a buff because people can use it against you. So previously, if someone wanted to hit you hard on, say you charged into a unit with a unit of knights, you'd try and do as much damage to them on the first round of combat, and then you'd try and just grind through them or hit them with something else. Bretonnian, not great at long combats. Now people are able to go hand, weapon, and shield, use the infantry buffs, which we'll talk about more later on as well. We've got an infantry section. But with that parry save, you might be facing up against a 3-up armor save on a unit that's only got heavy armor and shield. So you might not kill as much as you want to, and then theoretically, maybe they win combat with a static combat res. Next turn, they swap over to the halberds they're holding, something like that, and you'll find that you're taking more pain back than you were previously, and it's harder to win those combats. So just things to think about. You've got to commit more to breaking enemy units. Enemy units are going to be bigger. Enemy units are going to have more static combat res. So you've got to... I think the way Bretonnian's always played is that you've got to put overwhelming force into one area. Now you've just got to make sure that you're actually putting overwhelming force and not just really leaning on a single character and a couple of peg knights, Okay, so there's some nerfs in there, and that does make the army worse in some respects. But what about the buffs? What things are good for Bretonnia? And again, we're going to talk more about infantry as a separate section, because I think that's worth really breaking down. Dead or fled, 25% of wounds. Now, previously, if you got a dragon down to 2 wounds remaining, it didn't matter. You wouldn't score much. Now, of course, Bretonnians do have an incredible way of killing dragons, or threatening to kill dragons. I find the Virtue of Heroism character's main value is not actually going into combat with the dragon, but threatening to go into combat with the dragon, so it has to play more respectful. But If you get a character down low, let's say you're not playing the Virtue of Heroism character with the Monster Slayer, and you've just gone for a Knightly Temper Duke with an Ogre Blade. You're playing Grand Army or Errantry Crusade. These things are more likely than, they might have been previously. Okay, great. I'm Strength 5, I get up to Strength 7, I can do an actual good amount of damage through into the enemy, and maybe I get it down to a couple of wounds. Great, I'm going to get some points for doing so. This is a really nice bonus in terms of previously it was very difficult to score anything unless you killed the dragon entirely, so you'd have to avoid it. Good change here. Another thing, max points cap. Speaking of dragons, one of the main issues that the Virtue of Heroism character had was the Chaos Lord on dragon with an Ogre Blade and the Enchanting Aura, so you would have strikes last. That meant that the entire dragon and, well, the Ogre Blade Lord would strike first, and then the dragon would strike at the same time as you, so even if you managed to get the killing blow off, which, you might not survive to get to that point, given that they had the Ogre Blade, it was a very difficult fight for you, and you didn't want to be taking that one if possible. Now, with the max points cap, you can't take, well, also the nerfs to, Warriors of Chaos, they can't take the Enchanting Aura and dragons, but they just don't have the points to do that. Also, you're less likely to see well-defended dragons. The other army that was quite hard to kill dragons, High Elves, previously they could put a couple of Opal Amulets on their dragons. Opal Amulets, once per game, 2-up ward save. If you take a single Monster Slayer attack from the enemy, you just use your 2-up ward save on that one, and you're most of the time going to pass the save. Obviously, occasionally you'll pass, you fail the 2+, but this is a big buff in terms of the dragons that were previously hard to kill are now easier to kill. You can put one Opal Amulet on a High Elf dragon still if you go for the triple save, but I don't think that's the direction people will be going with, because it stops you from taking really anything else good. So, max point caps, very good there. Where else are max points caps good? Infantry Death Stars. Bretonnia can do pretty good core scoring Death Stars, and again, we'll talk about that more when we get to infantry. But enemy Death Stars do the sort of full commitment into them much more efficiently. Bretonnian likes spending some points on core, going, here's a sticky brick of infantry that I don't want to put too much commitment into. That's really good. If your opponent could put 1,500 points into a Death Star, which I guess they can with the characters, but let's say they put the whole army, or basically the whole army, into that unit, Bretonnians would really struggle to deal with it. That's not something that Bretts would have a great time fight against. Given that you're capped at 500 points for a single unit, it's harder to do that. There's always going to be, at minimum, 500 points that you can pick up from your opponent's army without touching the Death Star, and you can do good scoring with your own units without having to invest into, putting 500 points or 800 points into a single unit. So, max points cap for dragons and infantry units, really good there. Good stuff. Next up, we've got the maximum armor value. Another bullet that Bretonnians just managed to dodge like they're Neo in the Matrix. Theoretically, yes, if you have a Hippogriff Lord and you had given them the Grommel Great Helm, you could previously get up to a 2-up armor save. Now you're only capped at a 3-up armor save, but that's fine, because mostly you're just going to keep running around with a Royal Pegasus, and the Royal Pegasus can still get a 2-up armor save because it's cavalry. So maximum armor cap basically doesn't hurt Bretonnia at all. And, theoretically, some of the things that you're struggling to kill, or going to find it more difficult to kill, like a 2-up armor save dragon, now can only have a 3-up armor save. So, good changes there. And again, this is sort of infantry and cavalry are the only things that can have 2-up saves. That's the entirety of Bretonnians. Other armies that can bring other stuff, like Chaos and Beastmen can bring Shaggoth with 2-up armor save, 5-up ward save. Now it's only a 3-up armor save. Just nice changes across the board there. Good value for Bretonnian, and nerfs to the rest of the field, which makes Bretonnian a little bit better. Charge arcs. This is maybe one that I should have just put in sort of general changes, because I don't actually think it's a major buff. I've maybe put it in the wrong place, but it's now been clarified. If you're a single model and you are in overlapping arcs, you go into the arc that you were in the majority of. So previously, if you were 99% in the flank of your opponent and 1% in the front, but you were a single model, you had to charge them in the front. And that was obviously a problem because you weren't getting the combat resolution for charging the flank, you weren't getting the extra initiative bonus. It's just a downside. Your bases aren't huge for the Pegasus, so if you've got a Royal Peg, you're probably able to position in their flank anyway, but it just clarifies nicely and makes it more clear and just more efficient, so you can be very sure about where you're going, getting those flank charge or rear charges more easily. Magic, standards, and characters. Now, this isn't actually a buff, this is just a clarification, but I've put it under this section because Bretonnian benefit from this more than I think most armies in the game. If you have a magic standard on your unit, unit standard bearer, and a character joins the unit, they get the buff of the standard. This is how almost everyone was playing it before, but nice to see it clarified, and it does mean that all of those characters that you have inside of units get the effect of the, in the case of the Banner of Honourable Warfare, you can have a character re-rolling all hits against, enemy units with ranged attacks. You know what's got a ranged attack? A dragon. A breath weapon is a ranged attack. So, Banner of Honourable Warfare, give your character with Monster Slayer rerolls to hit. Just a lot of efficiency. Again, it's how the game was played previously, but just nice to see it clarified. Casting changes. I think Bretonnia are one of the armies that benefit the most from the casting changes, and that is because, I didn't put it there, they have such easy access to MR, and they don't actually care too much about the spells they buff, the spells they cast, and the spells that are really valuable for them are mostly signature spells, and they've got really good spell, dispel boosting items or casting efficiency items. So I think Bretonnia's come out really well in the wash, but again, we'll do a magic section, we'll talk about that more. And then again, infantry changes. Before we talk about infantry, I think I should just put the flag in the ground. I think Bretonnia has the third best infantry in the game. They have so much good infantry, and obviously the two armies that I'm talking about are the undead, so Tomb King and Vampire Count, but I think they have almost undead infantry. They're super cheap, they're very durable for their points, you can get them up to a reasonable save with hand, weapon, and shield and the parry save now. They have stubborn, shield wall, very easy to get. You can layer saves on them, you can have foot knights with a 3-up save and a 5-up ward save. There's spells that you can cast on them to increase their reliability, their durability. Really good stuff that you can put in for Bretonnia infantry, and given that that seems to be the shape of the game, again, as weird as it sounds to not be playing units of, Knights of the Realm as your default for Bretonnian, I think all of the infantry units that you can take in core specifically are really worth taking. So, great stuff there. Infantry changes, big buff to how Bretonnia plays. Last but not least, Impetuous. Oh, baby. This opens up Errantry Crusade super hard, and it also opens up a couple of buffs that you might not have looked at previously. So we'll go through those. In fact, before we go to the next sort of page, let's have a look at the things in the Arcane Journal / just sort of general army book that you would never have looked at before, but now you would look at. Again, I think I skipped forwards a little bit. Given that I've been looking at the FAQ now for a week and a half or so, you kind of assume that everyone knows what it is. But just to reiterate, the change for Impetuous is that previously, on a 1-2-3 at the start of the charge phase, a unit with Impetuous would have to charge even if they didn't want to, and a 4-5-6 they would get to act normally. However, it's now become a leadership test, and leadership tests, they benefit from Veteran, because you just get to reroll all leadership tests. So, why is that important? Well, Errantry Crusade and Exiles both have Veteran, which means that you can take Impetuous without much risk. You're going to be passing on a Leadership 8 or 9, test with a reroll. That's pretty safe. Very quickly, we'll look more at the actual Errantry Crusade rules, but why is that important? Crusader Zeal. So if you're in the Errantry Crusade, you get +1 to your charge roll and increase your charge range by 1 inch. That's just default for Errantry Crusade. So already you're getting a little bit of a movement buff, and that gets more important when we stack it with another couple of things that you might be looking at putting on, for example, Peg Knights or Foot Knights. First up, and my absolute favourite, is the Virtue of the Impetuous Knight. This is 40 points, and remember the way virtues work is you can take 1 virtue per model, and you can only take each virtue once. So you can't stack this across the army. However, it's really solid. It means that the model with the virtue gains Impetuous, which is fine, because if you take it in Errantry Crusade, you've already got it, or if you take it in Exiles, you've got Veteran in there, so you've got a lot of reliability in passing. This model and its unit increase the maximum charge range by 3, and they go plus D3 to their charge roll. So this is like a pseudo Swift Stride that stacks with Swift Stride. What does that mean? If you've got Pegasus Knights in Errantry Crusade, for example, they already had a 20-inch declarable charge range. Now they get up to 23 inches. Foot Knights go from, in Grand Army, having a 10-inch charge range, to, in Errantry Crusade with this virtue, a 14-inch charge range. That is not quite as good as Cavalry. That's rivaling Cavalry in terms of the actual declarable charge range. So if you're worried about winning the sort of push-pull, who's going to be able to get the charge off, who wants to get the charge, who's got the positioning, yeah, you can win that on a unit of foot knights, for example, by taking Virtue of the Impetuous Knight. So a really nice little piece here that you can use to get an advantage. The other big one is if we go down to the Errantry Banner, and then, again, this is something in the main book, so you can take it in any version of the armies you can take. I wouldn't take it in Grand Army, but it gives you +1 strength to the all units the turn they charge. Remember that banners do affect mounts as well, so this means that every model and their mount is getting +1 strength on the charge, and they gain Impetuous. Again, it doesn't matter, veterans, yada yada. So for 30 points you can get +1 strength, which is just a nice little boost in terms of actually hitting hard and killing things. A lot of the stuff that you've got in your army might be strength 3 base, in terms of you've got Knights of the Realm that are strength 3 becoming strength 4 with this banner, becoming strength 6 with lances, so you're wounding Chaos Knights on 2s. You've got a lot of options there, or even just putting it onto Pegasus Knights gets your lancers up to strength 7, which is fine. Maybe not the most impactful, but it does get the Pegasus attacks up to strength 5, which again, quite nice to have there as well. I guess I've referenced it enough times. Let's talk about the changes to infantry. First of all, what are the rules changes? You may know them already by this point, but Infantry Changes, we've got the Press of Battle, we've got Massed Infantry, and we've got Parry. All of these are incredible on our key infantry units. You know, I'm talking Men-at-Arms, Yemen-at-Arms, I'm talking Knights of the Realm on foot. These are the big things that I'm expecting to get a lot of value out of this. Press of Battle. This means as long as you didn't charge, and remember that pursuing after your opponent falls back in good order counts as charging as well. So as long as you didn't charge with this Press of Battle rule, your fighting rank becomes a 2nd rank. Now, remember that you can't go super wide for this. You can only be making attacks in terms of your movement distance away from being in base to base with the enemy model. Slightly confusingly worded there, but anyway, it shouldn't matter for ranked up infantry units because you're not going super wide. That's not an issue here. You get 2 ranks of attacks, which is nice. You also get massed infantry, which if you outnumber your opponent and you are an infantry unit, heavy or regular, you get +1 to your combat resolution score. Really nice buff here. Just makes it so it's super easy to, a dragon charges you. They kill your champion in a challenge. They do 2 points of overkill. I've got so many stacked pieces of combat res that I'm definitely going to be getting additional combat res there. I'm going to be winning by a lot. I'm double outnumbering them and making them flee and potentially catching them on the charge roll, the pursuit roll. Parry, this is a really nice one as well. Hand weapons and shields give you an additional +1 to your armor save to a maximum of 3 up. Remember, nothing in this army has better than a heavy armor in terms of what they're wearing, so a 3-up save wasn't available with hand weapon and shield before. Now it is. Really nice buff. Foot Knights get up to a 3-up save. Men-at-Arms and Yemen-at-Arms get up to a 4-up save in combat. And given the points difference, both of those are really, really solid. So huge buffs to infantry there. Weapon selection. We've talked about this a few times. There is something that is a little bit of a nerf for weapon selection, in that lances have been clarified that when you use them on a charge, which remember does include pursue, if you pursue into an enemy, so say you win combat on your turn, they fall back in good order, you pursue, you get to use your lances into that unit you've charged into or pursued into. Great stuff, love that. But if your opponent then charges you, whether they charge you in the front or they charge you in the flank or whatever, you don't get to use your lances against them. This is fine, thematically it makes sense. It wasn't really super clear previously, so it's just nice to have that clarified, but it is technically a bit of a nerf in terms of using lances. Where is it good? Halberds. Halberds are really, really nice, and you get them for free on Yemen Guard. You can buy them on Men-at-Arms, or in fact, actually, you get the polearm, don't you, which is either that or a spear. So, we've got halberds galore, and halberds work really nicely with demonology, but they're also pretty solid on their own. They've gone from being +1 strength, AP 1, Armor Bane 1, to +1 strength, AP 2, Armor Bane 1 on the charge. Why is that important? Well, you get less attacks if you charge, so giving you the option to do something a little bit more aggressive instead of just sitting with hand weapon and shields at all times is nice. And again, if you stack it with demonology, you can have your entire front rank of Yemen Guard, for example, having 2 attacks each at strength 5, AP 3, Armor Bane 1. So you can start to cleave through things, and you don't always just have to use hand weapon and shields. It's nice to not just be stuck in absolute combat res. We're just going to sit here forever until one of us makes a really unlucky roll and flees. So good change there, and really benefits the Bretonnian infantry as well. And again, the units that we're thinking about, Men-at-Arms, Yemen Guard, Foot Knights, all of these are really good. Men-at-Arms, I would say, are the least good of the 3. They have a really bad weapon skill in weapon skill 2, so anything weapon skill 5 or upwards is going to hit them on 2s, which is a really poor defensive ability to have. but they're 4 points a model. They're super cheap. They come with, I believe, built in the polearm and the shield. I'd have to double check that one. I normally just go straight to the Yemen Guard. But Men-at-Arms, very nice if you're playing Grand Army, or, you know, if you can't get the Yemen Guard because you're not playing Exiles. This is not a bad place to look. Yemen Guard, just the better version of Men-at-Arms. They also have Veteran built in. They're so cheap for what they do. They are pseudo undead in that they've got so many rules. You can give them a specific character upgrade and weapon upgrade to give them stubborn. They have shield wall. They are so hard to shift off a point, and they are so cheap. 5 points per model. Just take 40 of these, give them a war banner, sit them on an objective. You don't have to worry about it. They're just going to score you points throughout the course of a game. And theoretically, if your opponent wants to deal with them, they're going to charge you. They're going to get bogged down in the press of battle by your massed infantry doing parries. And then you can bring your Pegasus Knights back to kill whatever that's come to deal with them. So a really nice sort of defensive core to build from Men-at-Arms or Yemen Guard if you can take those. Those are even better. Foot Knights. These are not for every detachment. I don't think Foot Knights are good in Exiles, which is a shame, because I like Exiles the most. Personally, I'm not saying it's the best. My preference is Exiles. But you don't get the ward save from the off. So where Foot Knights become really, really good is having them as a cheap 11-point model, which, given all of the stuff you get, is very cheap. They just have hand weapon shields, give them full command, rank them up, get some rank bonuses. They've got a 3-up armor save in combat, and they've got a 5-up ward save against strength 5+, because the Lady's Blessing. Just an absolutely huge defensive bonus that you can put on there. Really nice to have. This is something that you can very happily sit on a point and do nothing with, or if you wanted to go for a more infantry death start where all you're doing is looking for relatively cheap defensive wounds, you can go for the Men-at-Arms, and then you can bunker loads of characters in there. Use some damsels, some prophetesses, whatever you want to go for. Some really, really nice uses for Foot Knights there. So, of course, now we've talked about the infantry, we should talk about the thing that's going to be supporting the infantry and the rest of the army, which is the magic. And again, I think Bretonnians have come out really well in the changes to magic. Previously, you weren't necessarily using Lore Familiar because you had such a good defensive item in the Prayer Icon of Quenelles, which gave you plus 3 inches on your dispel range and plus 1 to dispel hexes. That's just got better, and everyone else has lost reliability in their casting. So you're basically where you were, but with more bonuses, and things that were, previously less of an upside have become more of an upside. Let's talk about what they are. Only 1 level 4, 2 level 3s. This is absolutely fine. This doesn't affect you. You probably weren't ever going to be running 2 level 4 wizards. The only time this is a bit of a nerf is for Exiles, because previously you could run 3 level 3 outcast wizards. Now you can only run 2 level 3s. You can't run 3 of them and just count 1 of them as your level 4, unfortunately. So I guess a little bit of a nerf there, but I wasn't going to run 3 outcast wizards anyway. I don't think that was an efficient way to play the army. Magic resist on your casters. This is huge. An outcast wizard, which is the only sort of top level wizard you can take in Exiles, comes with magic resist 1. It is super cheap. It's basically an Empire wizard with a couple of slight downsides. That's fantastic. That's really good. Magic resist 1 now moves the needle quite a lot, and it's very, very cheap. Prophetesses and damsels have magic resist 2 built in. That is wild. This is not a faction that can buy cheap magic resist as an item. There's no brazen collar or witch hunter's ward, but your 60-point level 1 damsel comes with magic resist 2. If you want to buy that as a magic item, that's 40 points. And you're paying 20 points more to have a level 1 wizard that also comes with just other great rules, like making your entire unit have magical attacks. Don't worry about, ethereal with this army, because you probably want to be taking damsels and prophetesses. This is absolutely massive. I'm a huge fan of the fact that the prophetesses and damsels come with magic resist 2, and it really means that if you're interested in going heavy on Pegasus Knights, you might put a damsel on a Royal Pegasus and just fly them around in the unit, providing the, whatever buff you go from the lore, and also the magic resist 2, and also the dispel threat. Just great stuff there. Really, really nice to have. No access to spell reliability. Now, this was previously mentioned in terms of you weren't usually going for Lore Familiar. You can go for Lore Familiar. I'm not necessarily super bothered about that in most cases. Some exceptions we'll talk about. But that's fine, because nobody else does. And if people want to run that level 4 with a spell familiar to get that 5th spell, they're paying through the nose for it, because now the premium, sort of the gold standard caster, is a cheap level 3 caster, probably with a lore familiar and a couple of power scrolls. That's going to be the default we're going to see for a lot of casters. So having no access to spell reliability, not having a spell familiar or something like that, not an issue for Bretonnian. Basically where they were before. Great signature spells. This is where the no access to spell reliability does kind of hurt a little bit, because you might want to take either the Lady's Gift or the Lady's Wrath, which is, either giving your unit a a regen save, which is really nice, again, if you're going for a big unit of Foot Knights, or if you're going for a unit of Pegasus Knights. Either one of those, it's super nice to have just that regen save as well. Or alternatively, instead of the defensive buff, you can go for the Lady's Wrath, which is another remains in play, but it gives them strength and AP on their attacks, which again, quite nice to have. Both of those are solid. It's harder to dispel signature remains in play spells than it was previously, because the casting bonuses is lower, but it's not super hard to get rid of those, so that's not really a consideration. It does mean that you're less likely to go for a Law Familiar, though, so worth thinking about, and a little bit of a downside for Bretonnia, how good their signature spells are. Burning Gaze has gone down from a 10 to a 9. This is fine. Previously, people kind of used it with Battle Magic, going Pillar of Fire, Arcane Urgency, Fireball, Ruby Ring, Burning Gaze, and doing a lot of damage at range. I think that's no longer really the way that you want to go. We'll talk about when we get to the laws, but I just don't think there's enough output at range now. That Ruby Ring of Rune's been nerfed, Pillar of Fire's been nerfed, Burning Gaze is harder to get off, even though it's dropped in value. Yeah, I just don't see it. But you can do it if you still find that to be an effective way to play. Lady's Gift, it's the same. It still casts on a 7 or a 10. This is the spell that gives you a regen save. It's a 6-up save if you get a 7. It's a 5-up save if you get a 10. Harder to cast, a little bit harder to dispel. Remember, it's always dispelled on the lower value. So you go from dispelling it on, anything from a 4-up previously, which was almost guaranteed, to now you need to roll an 8, which is a 6 on the dice. So it's a little bit harder to get rid of. Not super noteworthy, but you might find that you end up keeping that regen for a turn when you're in range of the spell. Nice to have. Vortex Changes. Again, outside of Pillar of Fire, having that sort of mobile battery caster that some players were using, I think the Vortex Change is overall a positive, because, again, it's the sort of thing that someone might drop in front of you, but the wizard was out of range, to be dispelled. Now, if someone's using it to try and make your Pegasus Knights charge range harder, or to use as a leadership debuff so that they can, scream you to death, or make you run away with Tomb Kings or Empire, whatever version of debuff you're going for, it's much easier to get rid of, because you only have to have your wizard in range of the Vortex. So Vortex Changes across the board, really good for Bretonnia. You weren't using Vortexes all that much outside of Pillar of Fire, and that's dead. So good access to casting and dispelling reliability. Here's a great thing for Bretonnia. You have the prayer icon of Quenelles. We've already talked about it. You add 3 inches to your range on your dispel, and you get +1 for dispelling hexes. This is just incredible. If you also pair that with Magic Resist 2, say you've got a unit of Pegasus Knights that's your main, damage threat that's going to fly around, you put a Prophetess in there with the prayer icon of Quenelles, someone tries to hex you. Well, they're casting through your Magic Resist, so they're casting at +0. You're dispelling at +3, because you've got the level 3 dispel, and then also +1 for prayer icon. That makes it so you have you can roll up to 2 lower than them on the dice and still dispel the spell, which is absolutely nuts. Huge levels of dispelling reliability, especially if they're casting into your Magic Resist. Sacrament of the Lady is wild. This is a once per game. It's basically a power scroll, but better. Instead of going 3d6, drop the lowest, which is more reliability, but much more likely to miscast. This just gives you a flat +2 to cast, and the chance of casting is significantly higher than previously. In fact, let me just very quickly show you. As a super quick example, going back to our magic casting table, let's say you want to cast the Lady's Wrath on a 9. If you cast it normally, 62.5% chance to cast it, and if you use a power scroll, you go up to a 77.77% chance to cast it. So, plus 15% chance, which is not too shabby. But if instead you use the Sacrament of the Lady, you go from a 62% chance to cast to an 87% chance to cast, which is not a 15% increase, it's a 25% increase. And you don't have the increased risk of miscasting. There are some downsides. It's 30 points instead of 20, so it's harder to bring multiple of them. Realistically, my caster, in Bretonians, you're kind of capped on character points. Your characters are incredible. You're probably not going to have points to take 60 points to give you 2 upgraded power scrolls. So it's either between 1 Sacrament of the Lady at 30 points or 2 power scrolls at 40 points. That's generally how I go. And I think it just depends what you want to do. If you've got something that's really good multiple times, like Spectral Doppelganger, power scroll is the way to go. But if you want to lean more on one really big punch, like maybe Battle Lust on an Outcast Wizard, I really like having a Sacrament of the Lady there. So what does that mean for our lore selection? If we start off with the core laws that you can take on the Prophetess and the Damsel, Battle Magic. This is, again, it's still your evasive damage dealer, and it's still fine at doing that. It's worse than it was because Pillar of Fire is dead. Ruby Ring of Ruin is worse than it was. You know, none of your actual spells that do damage have gone down in terms of casting value, so it's harder to cast them. And Magic Resist make it harder for direct damage spells to get value. And people are going to bring you bigger units, so it's harder to just pick people off with a single caster. But there's still value to it. You can score points by killing stuff around the edge of the battlefield, killing opponents' scoring units that are sort of threatening to come and deal with your cabbage train, all those sorts of bits and pieces. So there's still value in it there. Also, Arcane Urgency and potentially Oaken Shield. This is really, really nice. Oaken Shield, this would be great if you could put it on an Outcast Wizard on a Pegasus, but Outcast Wizards can't go with the Pegasus Knights, which is normally where you'd want that ward save, so it's mostly for Arcane Urgency, but it is really nice to have if you go for a big brick of, let's say, Core Knights or something, and you want to give them a ward save, and you don't come with the Lady's Gift from the off. But Arcane Urgency on Pegasus Knights, incredible spell. Being able to march 40 inches is absolutely huge. Really nice positioning tool. Makes it difficult for your opponent to play against you. So, still some value in battle magic there, but not as much in my opinion. Elementalism. Now, Elementalism's a weird one. I think it's really good against you, and I think if you're playing a slower style, it can be good for you as well. It's a Death Star support law. The reason I like it for Death Star support is the Death Stars Bretonnians are playing, you probably don't want to put loads of points into them. What I'm most excited to do is put 40 Yemen on an objective and just leave them there. How do I want to support them? Well, I don't really want to put a caster in there. I don't want to put a BSB in there. I don't want to do anything like that. So I can cast at them unsupported. I can have a wizard in the area. I can see that my opponent is threatening to charge one unit in particular. You know, maybe they've got a couple of units set up to get a front and a flank charge into one unit, something like that. Well, I cast my Earthen Ramparts on that unit. Really solid. It's not bad. The fact that Earthen Ramparts stops you from marching means that it's not just sort of an auto take for Pegasus Knights, but I think it's got some place here, even though it's not my go-to. Illusion. This is my go-to, and I think weirdly Bretonnians can do all aspects of illusion casting really, really well, and that's why I like it, and potentially might have multiple illusion casters in a Bretonnian list, which sounds wacky, but genuinely might end up happening. Control playstyle. You can limit your opponent's options. Limiting your opponent's options is always going to be really strong if you can stop them from charging, if you can stop them from marching, if you can nerf their movement. That sort of playstyle, where Miasmic Mirage, you're hitting them with a nerf, is better and worse. Worse because it's harder to cast and people have magic resist, so it's really hard to cast on important units. But if your opponent's bringing, for example, dwarves, where they might not add extra magic resist because they're only magic resist 1 already, let's say you're casting on a Death Star of dwarves. If you hit them with Miasmic Mirage, they can only move 1 inch. And that's just, what's the dwarf player going to do? They can't charge, they can't march, they can move their movement -1. Maybe they've got, you know, a Bugman's Cart and they can move an extra +1 inch, so they get to move 2 whole inches. You can just tie down a unit very easily. If your opponent's playing the sort of Yeet playstyle, where they've got a Death Star and an Anvil, and they just want to cast, like, move with the Anvil really fast, you can outposition really hard if you stop them from being able to march with that unit, which is a fun one for you. That's obviously the best case scenario, but being able to stop a dragon from charging you, being able to stop 2 dragons from charging you, one with Miasmic Mirage and one with a Column of Crystal, really nice as well. So good value in control. Then reliable defensive buff. You might want to not pick a Lore Familiar in this army. You might want to pick the Prayer Icon of Cornell's. I probably do. I really like that. So you can take the illusion spell Glittering Robes. The signature spell cast on a 7. Even your level 1s can cast it with some level of reliability, and you get -1 to be hit. This stacks with the, you know, all of the stuff you've already got. You've got a ward save already, unless you're exiles. You know, you don't need to cast Oaken Shield on yourself most of the time. So just adding an additional layer, making it harder to be hit, really nice spell there. Do like that. Also, Spectral Doppelganger. Now, normally I would say Spectral Doppelganger is not a serious spell. However, you can spend 25 points for a magic weapon that gives you +2 strength, AP -1, and Armor Bane 1, I believe, off the top of my head. That's just a good weapon for a mage to have. You can actually cast spells that matter. You can cast Spectral Doppelganger, feel like you do a decent amount of damage. The things that you're attacking with that sort of caster might well be Toughness 3, Toughness 4 infantry. You know, sure, they'll have a decent save, but just getting some extra auto damage in there, really nice to have. So Illusion looks really good for Bretonians, and I would recommend it if you've got the if you're not sure which way you want to go. Illusion would be my default for the Prophetess especially. Moving on to the laws that only the Outcast Wizards can have, and remember that they can have all of the 3 that we showed on the last page as well. Dark Magic. This is probably my go-to if I've got a Outcast Wizard. I think it's really solid. Why? Well, it's a footcaster to support Pegasus Knights. Realistically, that's how I see an Outcast Wizard being used. What does it do? It's got Battle Lust, giving a unit Frenzy and Hatred. Yes, they have to overrun, that is a shame, but you can just juice them to do a huge amount of damage. If you've got a character that has, let's say, the virtue of heroism, not heroism, yeah, it is heroism. Monster Slayer. You've got a Monster Slayer character that isn't in a unit that rerolls hits. Well, now it can reroll hits. You give it Frenzy and Battle Lust. You give it that 5th attack if it's a Baron. You can make it more likely to hit. Really solid support there. Also just making it so that the unit does more damage into big units as well. Really nice. It's the sort of tool that you can add so you can actually crack enemy units of, let's say, Death Stars of Graveguard. That sort of tool. Signature Magic Missile. It's not good. It's not good, but you're probably going to want to take a lore familiar with this character, and you don't have access to the Lore of the Lady magic spells that you could take on a Damsel or Prophetess. It's better than it was because it's a blast template and people are running bigger units now that people are running infantry. It's there. It's there. You'll probably run it sometimes and you'll go, wow, that did something. But it's worth mentioning that you do have a signature spell you can swap into. Demonology. I like this one less. This is the sort of thing that you might want to put with Foot Knights, but again, you can only take the Outcast Wizard if you're playing in Exiles, and if you're playing in Exiles, you don't have a ward save on the unit of Knights. So I'm not in love with this as sort of a general rule, but also can't join Pegasus Knights. If you could put an Outcast caster on a Pegasus and put it in there, giving them the Demonic Vessel, +1 strength, attacks, and AP, I would do that every day of the week. That would be huge, but it can only be on a normal horse that doesn't have countercharge. If you mount this character, it's on a war horse which doesn't have countercharge, which means if you put it into a unit of Knights of the Realm, they lose countercharge. You could put it into, any unit that you put it into is going to lose countercharge. Obviously, Exiles don't have Obviously, Knights Errant don't have countercharge, so you could put it into Errants to juice them up, and that's fine. But I think Dark Magic is a better and more reliable lore to pick as a buffing caster, because you also don't have to be joined to that unit. You can just kind of fire it wherever you want it to be. You can juice up core Knights, though. That's the main thing. So I could see you running maybe a unit of Knights Errant for this, or maybe Knights of the Realm, and you just say, I'm not ever going to be in a situation where I care about countercharge, because I'm using this purely to crack undead. And, if they don't have undead, if they don't have big Death Stars of infantry that I worry about, I just don't put the caster in with that unit and I kind of find something else to do with it. Maybe that's the way to go. That's something. It does come with a good signature magic missile, casts on a 9, which is a high casting value, so hard to get off, but it is 2d6 strength 4 hits at AP -1. So there is some play there. If you wanted to take it as a specifically anti-undead tool, you definitely could do that. Spectral Steed. Again, if I could take this outside of Exiles, I'd be so jazzed, because this means that you can make your Foot Knights march 12 inches, march 24 inches. Why is that important? Well, Foot Knights are probably the only unit that's sort of tanky enough that you want to park them in front of your enemy's units turn 1. I don't really want to march Yemen Guard 24 inches. Maybe there's a situation where you do. Maybe you just lean on their inherent cheap nature, good combat rares, yada yada. But I think I probably don't want to march Yemen into my opponent's face, because that just gives them an easy way to potentially combo charge them. However, Spectral Steed, if that's something you want to play around with, this is the place to do it. Finally, we've got Necromancy. And Necromancy, I think, is really interesting in this game state, and that is because of leadership debuffing. Again, you don't have the tools to really make use of it. You're not Beastmen, you're not Tomb Kings, you're not Vampire Counts. You don't have ways to do extra damage because they have low leadership. Okay, that's fine. You can combo it with Illusion, where if they fail the leadership test, they take more damage from the Magic Missile and Illusion, which is fine, but you've only got level 3 casters, so it's hard to get both spells that you want to go for. It's probably not a combo. What's it got use for? Well, the use that it has is you can debuff enemy leadership without having to cast a Hex. You can get Spiritual Vortex, which is a vortex that goes on the board and is still really hard to dispel, even though your opponent's going to be in range of it, because it's, I think, cast on a 10, so they'd have to roll a 9 with a level 2 wizard to actually dispel it. Quite unlikely. Now, what does that do? It turns off the general's leadership aura, and that can be absolutely huge, because it means you're more likely to be able to break your opponents in combat. Instead of just making them fall back in good order, you make them actually flee. It's good with combat resolution bricks, and if the way that you want to do your core is just go for, I'm just going to make these things have loads of static combat res, not worry about doing any damage, I'm just going to win combat by, outnumbering, having static combat res in there, be there to tie up my opponent, and maybe then come in with Peg Knights for a flank charge or a rear charge later on to really seal the deal, or if not, make them run away because I've, lowered their leadership. This is the sort of playstyle that you'd want to take Necromancy for, and I think that is an effective playstyle. The problem is, I think everything else Bretonnians can do with Magic is already really good. So this is one lane you can go down, and I don't think it's bad, I just don't think it's the most effective lane to go down. Very quickly, before we go into the actual list building, let's remind ourselves what the two detachments do. And the Green Knight, this little tyke. How did the Green Knight get here? Yeah, Green Knight's not been nerfed. This thing's still incredible. I haven't mentioned it because there's been so much other stuff to talk about, but you can still just put the Green Knight in your list. Be very happy to do so. That's an option. And I think people are potentially going to be gearing up. And given that there's more points restrictions on characters, if people are running dragons, they're less likely to have magical attacks. So the Green Knight stocks are potentially up, although there is more combat res floating around. So maybe you're more likely to lose the Green Knight to static combat res. I haven't actually tested the Green Knight itself, so I just thought it was worth pointing out that Green Knight stocks is still pretty good. You can play the Green Knight and not worry. On to Bretonnian Exiles. What do we get? Well, reminder, we don't get to take a Duke because we're exiled. We get 0 to 1 Baron per 1,000 points. You can take a single Damsel, so that's a cheap source of magic resist too. And you can take Paladins, Outcast Wizards, and Sergeant-at-Arms, which again, are just a cheap way of making Yemen Guard more reliable. Core. You have to take at least 1 unit of Knight of the Realm on foot or mounted, at least 1 unit of Yemen Guard or Peasant Bowman, 0 to 1 unit of Knights Errant per 1,000 points, and then Men-at-Arms and Mounted Yeomen. Again, we've got one of the best infantry units in the game in Yemen Guard. We've got Peasant Bowmen, who are a very effective, cheap, skirmish, scoring, light shooting unit. Really like those, although they don't get into a lot of my lists now, but they do provide cover for the big units if needs be. Knights of the Realm on foot are less good here. Knights of the Realm on horse are maybe a little bit more exciting if you're going down Exiles as a route. Special, Squires, Pegasus Knights, Battle Pilgrims. We know what we're looking at here. It's Pegasus Knights. And then rare, we've got Questing Knights, Border Prince Brigands. Brigands have got slightly more interesting than previous, in that their Impetuous is slightly less of a downside. Field Trebuchets, and Border Princes Bombards. Bombards are still probably the best cannons in the game. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe they are. Let me know in the comments if you think that the new Cathay cannons are better. I think rules-wise, like line per line, the Cathay cannons are better, but they're 165 points to shoot twice. A Bombard is 100 points. Interesting. Yeah. I'm going to say that these are probably still the best cannons in the game, so you're super jazzed to have them. And as a reminder, the rules you get is you don't get the Grail Vow. You can swap the Knight's Vow for the Exile's Vow on all of the units you'd expect it to, basically all of your Knights. And the Exile's Vow gives you Stubborn, huge. Veteran, huge. Never panic when levies or peasantry destroyed within 6 inches or flee through it. Huge. You can join peasants. You do not have to take a specific vow to join peasants. You can load up a unit of Yemen Guard if you want to. You're not necessarily going to do that, but you don't need to jump through hoops to be able to join into units of, peasants, which is really nice if you want to build in that direction. Reclaimed Glory. They cannot pray at the start of the game. However, if a unit with the Blessing of the Lady special rule overruns, makes contact with a fleeing enemy unit during a charge or pursue move, or win a combat as well. Kill an enemy in challenge, not win a combat. So there's multiple ways that you can get the ward save. So you don't start off with it, which makes Foot Knights less appealing, but, those Pegasus Knights are probably going to have a ward save from turn 2 or 3 onwards, depending on how you play with them. However, you can't gain it a second time. Why is this nice? Well, remember, if you're Bretonnians versus Bretonnians and neither army can pray, the Exiles player has an advantage because they have a way of gaining the ward save, which is really nice. Errantry Crusade. What do we get here? Well, a very similar list to what you'd expect to see from the start. So characters, 0 to 1 Duke per army, same as Grand Army. 1 Baron or Prophetess per 1,000 points, same as Ground Army. 1 plus Paladin, so you have to take at least 1. That's fine. It's just, you know, you're pushed into taking a free Battle Standard Bearer. That's fine. Damsels and Sergeants at Arms. Both of these are solid, so just nice to have the options of. 33% core. This is the first downside for Infantry Crusade. The second is that you have to take Knights Errant. Now, Knights Errant in this detachment, obviously they always have Impetuous, but in this detachment everything has Impetuous, and in this detachment you get to re-roll your Impetuous test, so it's less of a downside, but I'm not in love with them. They're better than they could be, but they're not great. Battle Pilgrims as core. Theoretically, this should be a good core unit, but you're capped at only 30 of them, and I think that's just not big enough for a unit that wants to take some hits. Knights of the Realm on foot, Squires, Mounted Knights of the Realm. So you've got some options here, but really the big thing that screams out to me is this unit here, Knights of the Realm on foot. Squires are not bad. You can have forward deploying, scouting, scoring core units. That's pretty cool. Into special, we've got units you probably don't care about, Men-at-Arms, Peasant Bowmen, Battle Pilgrims, yada yada, Questing Knights, and then we can take Pegasus Knights. And then into rare, we've got Grail Knights, Yeomen, and Trebuchets. So all the stuff that you might expect to see, and also you could take Knights as mercenaries. Are there any mercenaries you can take that are specifically different for exiles? I can't remember off the top of my head. Free Company, Militia, and Empire Archers. Okay, so nothing we care about here. Would I be taking either of those as mercenaries? Probably not in this army, realistically. I think just the risk of them misbehaving is not worthwhile, and your cavalry is good enough, and it has to be taken in core to be scoring. As a reminder, the rules for Infantry Crusade, all of the rules that you'd expect. Yes, that means all of the knights, but also mounted yeomen. Gain the Crusader's Zeal rule, which is +1 to their charge roll and +1 to their declarable charge range. But also, if these units here could have the Knight's Vow, or do have the Knight's Vow, they may replace it with the Crusader's Vow, which gives you Veteran, really nice. No Stubborn in this detachment, but Veteran's still very, very good. Again, you don't have to make panic tests if peasantry flee through you, yada yada. But also we have the restriction here where characters with the Chivalrous Vow cannot be joined by peasantry characters, and vice versa. So you can't just put loads of stuff into a unit of men-at-arms. Earn your spurs. Finally, if you capture standards with Knights Errant, you get 100 victory points instead of 50. And also, in addition, within 6 inches of a model with Grail Vow, which is basically a Duke, or any Lord of Bretonnia, a unit of Knights Errant may reroll any natural ones on a roll to hit, which is just a solid little boost to efficiency, especially if you're putting, something like the Lady's Wrath on there, giving them plus strength and attacks. No, not strength and attacks, plus AP and... yeah, the other buffs that you get there. But yeah, so not bad. It just buffs your entry knights that you have to take a little bit. Starting off with Bretonian Exiles, I genuinely feel like this writes itself to an extent. I really like Bricks of Yemen Guard, and if I start with 40, and we can tweak them here, 40 with full command, and then they've got the Halberds default. This just gives you such a really solid unit. Just as a reminder, because we haven't looked at Yemen Guard specifically, you're paying 5 points per model for a unit of 10 plus regular infantry with hand weapons, light armor, and shield. So 5 up armor save against shooting, 4 up armor save using parry. They have got Horde, which gives them an extra rank in terms of the rank bonus. They've got Warband, which means they add that rank bonus to their leadership in terms of everything apart from restraint tests and... I think rally tests and Impetuous. I'm not sure on the rally. I'd have to double check. I don't run away a lot with a unit that's got a leadership 10, funnily enough. Peasantry, which means that they're effectively levies to some degree. Veteran, so they've got built-in rerolls. Rerolls on a leadership 5... Sorry. Rerolls on a 5 point per model unit is absolutely wild. And then also we've got Shield Wall. As a reminder, Shield Wall gives you, if you have shields and you use them on the turn that they were charged, they give ground instead of falling back in good order, and you can combo that with the Blessed Triptych, which gives you Stubborn. Now, the problem with the Blessed Triptych, which Stubborn means that instead of rolling, you don't fall back in, you auto fall back in good order. God, I wish I could talk today. The problem with that is it's an upgrade for the Grail Monk, and I really like it because if your opponent doesn't kill this unit champion, because you do have 2 unit champions, you just get to Stubborn and auto, just fall back in good order, give ground with Shield Wall. That's really, really solid. That's fine. They're just going to kill the Grail Monk. So I generally don't pay the extra 25 points here, but if you've got some spare, there's nothing wrong with putting that in. And we're going to go with 2 units here, because that's going to be a really solid core in terms of scoring points. And we might chip down on the points here a little bit, depending on how we want to build everything else up. If we're playing Exiles, we're probably playing Bombards. These things are so good. They are such an efficient cannon. Just as a reminder, they are Bombards. D3 strength 8, so that's, you know, theoretically only wounding enemy cannons on 3s, but almost everything else in the game on 2s. AP -3, Armor Bane 2, the best version of the AP and Armor Bane on any cannons. Multiple wounds, D3 +1, incredible stuff. Looking at the misfire table as well, on a 1 it's destroyed, that's fine, that's standard. 2 to 3, lose a wound, fail to shoot. The crew lose the wound. So if you're being shot at, this doesn't affect you. Remember that war machines have 2 pools of wounds. They've got the ones they take against shooting, which is the cannon's actual wounds itself. They've got the ones they take in combat, which is the crew's wounds. This doesn't matter, because if you are charged, your cannon is dead anyway, realistically. They're just going to kill the cannon. If you have 3 wounds or 2, it doesn't make a difference. So losing a wound on this misfire, but being able to shoot next turn is absolutely huge. 4 to 5, you can't shoot this turn, but nothing else. That's fine. On a 6, you can't shoot next turn, but you shoot and you roll, you go an extra 2 inches on your guess. So this is huge. Again, you effectively, 2 through 6, you lose 1 round of shooting. Here and here, you lose the turn, you know, that you're shooting this turn, and here you lose next turn, but you still get to shoot this turn. Absolutely wild. Bombards are nuts good. Really, really solid stuff. The fact you can only take 0 to 1 per 1,000 points is the only thing stopping me from taking 18 of them. Not that that would be legal with the match play restrictions. On to everything else. I think let's just default start with a squad of 5 Pegasus Knights. We'll go with my default, if I'm going for 1 banner, is the Banner of Shalons, making it so your enemy can't stand and shoot you. Absolutely huge in some matchups and just nice to have. We'll give them the Exile's Vow there as well. Really solid stuff. And characters. Let's go for... I think Exiles play double melee character very well, so let's just start with that. So we're going to go Exile's Vow, Royal Pegasus, and we'll just copy this. So the first one will make the General, and the General is going to have the Frontier Axe, which, if you remember, you know how Ogre Blade got nerfed to 75 points? What if you could take a better Ogre Blade for 30 points? The only downside is that it removes 2 hands, requires 2 hands. Really, really solid. So 30 points for the Frontier Axe, and then I think on this character, if we're making it the General, it does make you a little more vulnerable to cannonballs, but I do like the Grommel Great Helm, getting you up to that 2-up armor save, re-rolling 1s on the armor save there, and as well, we'll give him a Charm Shield. Why are we giving him a Charm Shield? You don't start with a ward save in Exile, so just having that once per game 5-up ward against something like a cannonball, really nice to do as well. And remember, Virtue of Knightly Temper, we're going to give them the extra attacks D3 and Hatred, all enemy special rule, so it doesn't even matter that we only start off with 4 attacks for our medium level character, and Weapon Skill 6, who cares, we're rerolling all of our hits. So super solid, really, really good stuff there. Just an absolute beater of a character and relatively tanky. Then we've got the Baron as well that we're going to give the Virtue of Heroism. For those of you not aware, it gives you Killing Blow and Monster Slayer, so you can just run around and absolutely punk characters and or dragons, which is really nice. It's only when you're using non-magical weapons, as it says here, which means we're going to go with a Lance, and this one we're going to give a shield because we're not going to have points for giving it the Charm Shield, and we're going to go for the most efficient way of killing enemy monsters, which is 3 Lucky Heirlooms. Now, Lucky Heirlooms are an extremely common item that you can only take if you're in the Exiles detachment. See if it'll load up here. But what it does is it lets you re-roll for each heirloom 1 die per turn, and I believe that's per round, which is a hit roll, wound roll, armor save, ward save, maybe regen, and then maybe something in there as well. You're saving them for your wound rolls or your armor save. That's the big thing here, because you're looking to be fishing for 6s. It's only fails, but again, if you're strength 4 and they're toughness 6, you can just use your hand weapon and shield, and that way all dice apart from 6s are going to be fails, so it doesn't matter anyway. Okay, didn't want to load there, you'll just have to take my word for it, or you can look it up yourself. That leaves us with 374 points. So what are we looking to juice out? Well, we do need another couple of units, and I probably want to go... Let's just start off with an Outcast Wizard level 3. And as mentioned, I do quite like the Dark Magic Caster to buff up the unit of Pegasus Knights with the characters. So let's go something along the lines of Lore Familiar Double Power Scroll. Something like that seems pretty solid. And that means that we're going to be picking in Dark Magic the best spells. We're going to go for Word of Pain, 18-inch range Hex, -1 Strength and Toughness, or if our opponent has taken loads of magic resist, we probably won't bother. We're going to go for Theoretical Infernal Gateway, which lets you teleport characters but also get them out of combat. We're going to go for Battle Lust, which gives the unit Frenzy and Hatred, and then also Phantasmagoria is not bad. It's not a great spell, but it does give your, if your opponent's playing footsie and trying not to go for the I'm going to charge you, you can put it down first round. If they end the movement, they have to take a panic test, so if they're moving onto an objective, they potentially run away from it. Then the next turn, if they pass, they become subject to the Impetuous special rule while they remain within 12 inches of the template. So next turn, they have to test to charge you, so you could potentially Impetuous bait them off objectives. It's not a great spell, but it has some value, and again, it's got a casting value of 9, so your opponent would have to roll an 8 on the dice to beat it, even if they're in range to dispel. So not too shabby there. And again, of course, none of these lists are, this is the out-and-out way to play, but these are some sort of example lists of how I'd be building these different factions. Why not also go with maybe a unit or two of cheap first charge to try and deal with enemy units? So something like 6 Knights of the Realm here. Okay, we're not going to have points for 2 units, so let's just commit and go for a unit here of 7 with the War Banner, just to get a little bit more combat res. Give them the Exile's Vow, and that leaves us with 6 points left over. Is there anything that we really want for 6 points? There we go. Musicians are 7 points, of course they are. So we could just do something cute, like put a Gauntlet of the Duel on our unit champion, so that the challenges of this unit champion cannot be refused, meaning that if our opponent doesn't have a unit champion to soak it, we can theoretically go in, and if we're playing against Bretonnians, and they've got no unit champion in their Pegasus Knights, whether it's been killed previously or something like that, we can use this to get that challenge. Anyway, by the by, there are ways to sort of just sneak in there. But this gives us some really solid coring with the Yemen Guard. We've got a unit of Knights of the Realm that can aggressively punish enemy scoring units, potentially threaten to take them off it themselves, deal with them in terms of getting rid of their first charge, having some level of punch, having some level of combat res with the War Banner and everything else there. If you hit them with Battle Lust, they hit actually kind of hard, which is nice. And we've got Double Baron here and a big unit of Peg Knights. And, of course, the 2 Bombards as well to threaten from range. So this is sort of like the default Exiles list I'd be looking at. Next up, we can get way more spicy, and this is the Errantry Crusade. So let's start off with 2 units of Knights Errant, and I don't really want to go too heavy into them. So we're going to start off with 6 with a unit champion, and then maybe come back to these, but I'm not 100% sure we will come back to them. Next up, I really like the Mounted Knights, not Mounted Knights of the Realm. I really like the Foot Knights of the Realm. Here we go, that's what we're looking for. So we're going to go a unit of some number with a War Banner, and we'll give this character... Is there anything we need to give them? Not really. I wouldn't mind giving them a Charmed Shield, because it just makes them slightly more resistant to character challenges. You take less overkill, yada yada. And let's go up to... We probably don't need to go too heavy on them. Let's start off with 35, and we maybe go a little bit bigger or smaller, depending on how we feel. I don't think we need to give them great weapons. I think they're absolutely fine without great weapons. So what do we want to put in there to support them? Well, we'll start off with a Paladin BSB. I think that's a really solid shout. Let's go BSB, Shield, Crusader Vow, keep them on foot, and we're going to give them, let's give them the virtue of the Impetuous Knight. We were talking about this before. Gives the unit Impetuous. They already have Impetuous. The entire unit has Veteran, so we get to reroll. And it gives you plus 3 inches on your declarable charge and plus D3 on the actual charge roll. So there's a unit of Foot Knights that can charge suddenly a grand total of 14 inches. Not reliably, but they can threaten to do it, which means that they're sort of like 10, 11, 12-inch charges are more reliable as well. But yeah, I don't think we need to go with anything else on this character. Pretty happy there. I think if we're going for this sort of build, we probably want 1 Pegasus character. So we'll go for the Duke, and if we're going for a single character, I like going sort of Royal Pegasus, Ogre Blade. Syrian's Locket is quite nice. It makes it hard for you to be sniped out by enemy Ogre Blade characters because you're immune to multiple wounds X, or you can't be shot by cannons super easily. So this is nice for 25 points. Also give them the Virtue of Knightly Temper. So this Duke is going to hit real hard. It's not as good at killing dragons as something with Monster Slayer, but it can threaten them because you've got default strength 5, getting up to strength 7. The AP2 on the Ogre Blade goes further now that they're capped at a 3-up armor save on a dragon. So the best case scenario, they've got a 5-up, 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 which is going to save a lot of the damage, don't get me wrong, but you still get sort of like 35% of your attacks through when you get to the save roll. Saying it out loud is not very good, but you do have more punch into something like that if you need to go into it. We'll also go with a unit of Pegasus Knights, and I default to 5, and with the Banner of Shalons, as previously mentioned, but we can come back and maybe do something different. In fact, what if we went Errantry Banner? Because that would give us +1 strength. I think turning off the stand and shoot is too important, but it is something that we could theoretically do down the line. In fact, what if we went... Oh, you can't put any of the good banners on the Knights Errant. That's a shame. Okay, so I'm not super worried about putting a unit or anything else on there. Okay. What else do we want to bring? Well, we've got this unit of Knights of the Realm on foot. We definitely want to support them. And the first way we want to support them is with some sort of prophetess that is bringing the juice. And by the juice, I mean illusion, because illusion gives them -1 to be hit. They've already got a ward save. Let's just make them more resistant in that way. And I'm going to go with making sure I get my spells off. So I'm going to get Law Familiar, because that's going to let me pick the Masmet Mirage and Column of Crystal if I want them. A couple of Power Scrolls, because those spells have high casting values. And Psych, I'm actually going to give them the Sword of the Stout-Hearted, which is Strength +2, AP -1, Armor Bane 1. You thought I wasn't going to do it. This is a Spectral Doppelganger character, and I think that's really, really solid. Remember, Spectral Doppelganger goes off on a 9, so if you really need it to go off, or if you're going into something with magic resist, you want to be hitting that Power Scroll. But 2d6 auto hits at Strength 5, AP 1, Armor Bane 1 is just juicy. I do like that in terms of having that as a caster that can attack without having to be in harm's way. So, good stuff here. Keep that on foot. We can just keep it level 3. You probably don't want Miasmic Mirage and Column of Crystal and Glittering Robes and Spectral Doppelganger all in the same game. You probably drop one of them. But if you find that you're playing games and you go, actually, I wish I had the 4th spell, just 30 more points will get you there. Is there anything else we want in here? Ooh, we're almost at Green Knight points. I don't know that I feel like I need trebuchets in this list, but I also wouldn't mind more damage. Now, this is not sort of the out-and-out best unit to put in, but Grail Knights do kind of punch hard. So, yeah, we could go theoretically 6 Grail Knights here. Oh, no, sorry, the reason we're not doing this is we would get Impetuous, I believe, if I just double-check my list here. Okay, yeah, so we would get Impetuous on the Grail Knights, but because we don't have the Knight's Vow on Grail Knights, we'd end up not getting the Veteran special rule. So I'll put Grail Knights into the next list, because I know they're a fan favourite. I like them thematically. I wouldn't mind putting some on the tabletop, but we'll hold off for now for putting them into Errantry Crusade. We'll do that in Grand. Okay, so back to this list. Let's take out these Grail Knights, and we do have to find 250 points to fill. What do we find the most appealing here? I think it might just be characters. I think that's the thing that I'm maybe most excited to put in. So what if we manage to put in some foot characters to support the Knights of the Realm? We could theoretically put a Baron in. What would a foot Baron look like? Is there anything we can put in that's specifically exciting? I'm not sure there's anything that I love in terms of... There's some like vaguely interesting things in here, but not anything that's super worth putting in. If you wanted, you could go Virtue of Discipline to mean that you can march without taking leadership tests. You're Veteran, you get to reroll that anyway. Rerolling failed hits in the challenge is not awful, so maybe we can do something here with like a Great Weapon, Shield, Crusader's Vow, on foot. See, I just don't think that's actually adding anything to the unit. You know what would add to the unit? Just being really tanky. So you could potentially soak another challenge. At which point, I think, let's not bother with a Baron. Let's just go with another Paladin. We'll go Hand Weapon Shield, Crusader's Vow, and then we'll just go something like... Can we go Grammel Great Helm? That wouldn't stack with parry. Maybe the Anointed Armor. Only on 2 wounds. Kind of want to give him regen, but I don't want to take a Baron level character for that. Difficult to fill the points out. I actually don't know that I care about putting another character in this unit here. So maybe we just cut some points. So we'll go on the Prophetess. We'll take off one of the Power Scrolls here, down to a single one. We'll take the Green Knight, and then we've got to find 4 points as well. Is there a way to do that? I actually think that would be really, really difficult to do in this case. We'd have to drop the sword. Oh, do I want to have the Green Knight, or do I want to go down the line of Spectral Doppelganger? I think it's... Let's meet in the middle. We'll lose the Power Scroll. That might be a mistake. That might be a mistake. You know, tweak as you see fit. But potentially, let's just go to 36 Knights of the Realm here, supported by a Prophetess. We've got the Duke... Prophetess and the Paladin are in the Knights of the Realm on foot. Then we've got a Duke with the Pegasus Knights, the Green Knight running around doing some absolute havoc. 2 units of Knights Errant to try and break enemy infantry alongside the Pegasus Knights. And I think that's fine. I would like to put a Power Scroll back on the Prophetess, but points are a little bit sharp. Maybe the Green Knight doesn't make it into his list. Or maybe we just don't bother with the virtue of the Impetuous Knight. But again, this is not about being the most out-and-out perfect list. This is about an example of how I'm looking at building lists. And these are the sorts of things that I want to put into an Errantry Crusade list. The other thing you can do is you can just go full violence. You can go, for example, Knights of the Realm, give them... you just can't take any of the nice upgrades in this, can you? So you could go War Banner here, and then you could put like a Paladin in with Battle Standard Bearer and potentially the Crusader's Tapestry, which gives you Frenzy. So you can have a fairly cheap unit that has a lot of attacks, which is not awful. It's not how I particularly like to play the game, but if you want to play a full send build, you can just put more damage at, you know, and have a Frenzy unit that's going to do some real punching in there, which is pretty easy to fit in instead of like the Impetuous Banner. I think I just like the Impetuous Banner. Even putting this on a Pegasus would be really solid, because you could just then threaten a 23-inch range charge, which is so hard to play against for your opponent. Finally, we've got Ground Army, and as promised, I am going to start off with some Grail Knights, and I think maybe we just go like 6 with full command. What would we want to put in this unit? We can come back to this unit. I'm not sure there's anything that I super want to upgrade them with. They're already pretty expensive. 250 points for 6 wounds with a 3-up armor save is the real downside of Grail Knights. But, well, like I say, we'll come back to them. So here, I think for Grand Army, it's another place you can go Knights of the Realm on foot, but we've already shown what that sort of list plays like. So let's just go for sort of a more default Bretonnian core that you might have seen previously. So something like a unit of, let's say, 8 Knights of the Realm with full command. Give them the War Banner here. No need for an upgrade on the unit champion. Then we'll just fill out the rest of the points with Peasant and Bowman. And I think units of 15 are quite nice now, giving them skirmish as well. The reason for that being quite nice is you're looking for decent scoring. So we could go 3 units, and let's just bump these up to, let's say, 18, 18... We'll just go 3 units of 18. And yes, so we've got more wounds. This is core scoring. It also helps pick up enemy light units as well. Every time I've played against Peasant Bowmen, I've been pleasantly surprised at how quickly they chip away at my T3 elves with low armor save. So there are some matchups where they do a lot of work, and the rest of the time they're just going to sit on objectives pretty comfortably. Again, and you don't have to take Pegasus Knights, but it is worth pointing out that they are just the best thing in the book still. Even with the nerfs, they're still incredibly good. So I think a unit of 5 with the Banner of Shalons is just sort of such an easy auto take to put in, but instead of going that the way, you could go, you know, more Ground Knights or something like that if you wanted to, or lean more into Core Knights if that was your particular flavour. Again, we've seen the character loadouts that we really like, so let's just put them in this case. So we'll start out with the Grand Army version of the character that we're going to give the Virtue of Heroism. Reminder, that's Killing Blow and Monster Slayer. It's just Lance, Shield, Royal Pegasus, and then we really like giving this character the Grommel Greathell to give them a 2-up save, rerolling 1s, Syrian Locket so they don't get sniped by cannonballs, and a Gauntlet of the Duel is nice as well, because it gives you that ability to make it so opponents can't avoid you with challenges with your killing blow. This is going to be the general. Jobs are good in there. Then we'll go for the Baron, and again, the Baron, we're going to go with, we don't need to give them the Grail Vow, we can just leave them as the normal Knight's Vow, Royal Pegasus, and they're going to go Ogre Blade. They don't have points for any other upgrades, and they go Knightly Temper. And this is still really solid. It's not as good as the Exiles version, where you can go for the Frontier Axe and some other upgrades, but you're still hitting super hard. You're still, 4 attacks plus D3 with Hatred, so you're rerolling your attacks. You've got Strength 6 by the time your Ogre Blade kicks in, AP 2, Armor Bane 1, D3 damage. Just going to kill a lot of stuff, so really nice loadout here, but does want to be supported by characters more. And in this case, maybe we just go a couple of smaller units of the Pegasus Knights like this. So in this case, let's go one with the Banner of Honourable Warfare, and this is the one that the Duke's going to go with because it gives you rerolls for hit rolls. So if you go into a dragon, again, your Monster Slayer character can reroll hits, and then you've got the higher chance of getting the wounds off. And then the other one, Banner of Shalon, so no stand and shoot. And that still leaves us with, 100 odd points. And then this very much becomes points to flavour. Maybe you go a Prophetess to go on a roll peg with them. That would not be bad at all. But, we're trying to go... don't delete that. Let's delete this. Yeah, we don't want to go too heavily into that. Magic Resist is really good, so maybe we just go something like a... I think, actually, on second thoughts, let's go back up to just 5 in a single unit, so we can add an actual Dispel threat in. But this time around, we're going to go Lady Elise de Shard, who is fantastic. She gives you, all the stuff you'd expect to see. Magic Resist 2, she has got... the Aura of the Lady, which means it's hard, gives magical attacks there. She's got a Beguiling Order, so she's harder to be hit. Not that that matters, because you can retire to the back. All of this stuff is great. She's going to join to the Knights of the Realm, give them some buffs there. She knows spells from Elementalism. Just a really, really solid caster, but the main reason that you bring her is that she has the Chalice of Brionne, which gives you... Sorry, there's 2 reasons. The Chalice of Brionne is a -2 to leadership if you've got to use enemy characters that make them take a leadership test. So Rallying Cry, for example, or, something like the Falcon Horn or any of those rules where it's a once per game buff. Those are really nice to debuff there. And then the one I was actually thinking of, which is... nope, not... You can pick 2 signature spells. She's got too many laws. The main thing that I'm trying to say is that she has Arcane Backlash. There we go. +1 to Dispel, so she's Dispelling with +3, so better than any other base wizard in the game, or like equal with some base wizards. And in addition, she rolls double on Dispels. She automatically makes the enemy wizard lose a wound, and the spell is unbound. Not double one. Stumbled my way through that. She has a lot of special rules. She's very effective at making it so that your opponent can't cast spells, is what I was trying to say. We do have to lose 9 points here, so maybe we cut the command on the Grail Knights. That's not super important. Again, this is more sort of general vibes for what we're looking at. A couple of killy characters. The core is more likely to be less Death Stars and more Bowman / Knights of the Realm. You don't have to go to 18s. I like going bigger than the 10s people were running previously, because in this sort of list, this is your best core scoring. Some Pegasus Knights just because they're good always, and then Grail Knights because people like them. But yeah, I'm having a lot of fun writing Bretonnian lists. I've written a lot of Bretonnian lists, and is there anything that you found that you weren't playing before that you've decided to put in that you find very effective? Very excited to test with, because I am probably going to do some sort of hobby project with Bretonnians where I end up painting channel members, the people who have supported the channel, as their heraldry on my Bretonnian Knights. I think that'll be a fun project, which I will start at some point in the next 2 years, probably. When I get around to it, it'll be cool. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Grail Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.